Captain Jake Morrison stared out at the endless black of space through the bridge windows of the New Horizon and wondered if this mission would be his last. For 50 years now, humanity had been allowed to exist in their single star system like animals in a cage, while the 1,000 alien empires controlled everything else in the galaxy. The Galactic Consortium had made the rules very clear when they first arrived at Earth in 2337. Humans could live and even travel, but only with permission, and only to places the aliens decided were safe. No advanced weapons, no real exploration, and certainly no attempts to expand beyond what they were given. Most humans had accepted this as the price of peace, but Jake had always felt like something was wrong with the whole arrangement. "Captain, we are approaching the debris field," said Commander Ryan Davis from his station. Ryan had been Jake's friend since their academy days, and the only person on the ship who truly understood why this mission mattered so much. The debris they were investigating had been discovered 3 weeks ago by a mining ship that reported strange readings. Before quickly leaving the area, Dr. Lisa Williams looked up from her instruments with excitement in her eyes. She was the best xenoarchaeologist Earth had, and if anyone could figure out what they were dealing with, it would be her. "The metal composition is unlike anything in our databases," she said. "This ship is old, Jake. Really old, maybe thousands of years." The New Horizon moved slowly through the wreckage, using its scanners to map every piece of debris. What they found made no sense according to everything they knew about galactic history. The ship was clearly more advanced than anything the Consortium used, but it had been destroyed long ago. Jake ordered his crew to bring aboard the largest intact piece they could find. Inside the recovered section, Dr. Williams discovered something that changed everything. Data cores that had somehow survived whatever destroyed the ship were still partially functional. It took her 6 hours of careful work, but she finally managed to access some of the information stored inside. "Jake, you need to see this," Lisa called from the lab. Her voice carried a tone he had never heard before. When he arrived, she was staring at holographic displays showing star maps and technical diagrams that meant nothing to him, but clearly meant everything to her. This ship belonged to something called the Progenitor Civilization, she explained. According to these records, they were the most advanced species the galaxy had ever seen. They built most of the technology that the Consortium still uses today, but then they just disappeared about 1,000 years ago. Jake studied the displays, trying to understand what he was looking at. "What happened to them?" he asked. Lisa's expression grew dark as she continued reading through the data. "That's the interesting part, Jake. They didn't disappear naturally. The records show that the current Consortium empires were once just as restricted and controlled as we are now. The progenitors kept everyone at primitive technology levels to maintain order and prevent wars. So the Consortium learned from them," Jake said, but Lisa shook her head. "No, Jake, that's what makes this so important. The Consortium isn't just following the progenitor example. According to this data, the 1,000 empires we know today were the ones who destroyed the progenitors and took their place. They've been maintaining the same system of control for 1,000 years, keeping every younger species trapped at low technology levels." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. Everything humanity had been told about galactic history was a lie. The Consortium hadn't evolved naturally into their dominant position. They had murdered their way to the top and were now doing to humanity exactly what had been done to them. "We need to get this information back to Earth immediately," Jake said. But before he could give the order, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. "Captain," Ryan called from the bridge. "We have multiple ships approaching fast. Configuration matches hegemony fleet vessels. They're demanding we prepare to be boarded." Jake felt his heart sink as he realized they had been discovered. The hegemony was one of the most powerful members of the Consortium, and their ships were armed with weapons that could turn the New Horizon into vapor in seconds. But as he looked at the data cores containing proof of humanity's true situation, he knew they couldn't surrender. "Lisa, secure those data cores," he ordered. "Ryan, prepare for evasive maneuvers." If we can reach the edge of the system, we might be able to jump to hyperspace. The lead hegemony ship opened a communication channel, and the image of High Commander Zex Thul appeared on their screen. The alien's face was a mask of cold authority. As he spoke in perfect English, "Human vessel, you will surrender the progenitor artifacts you have recovered. Failure to comply will result in your destruction." Jake looked around his bridge at the crew who had followed him on this mission. They were all looking at him, waiting for orders, and he could see the fear in their eyes. But he could also see something else. The same anger and determination that had been building in humanity for 50 years of captivity, Commander Zexthul, Jake replied. "I'm afraid we can't do that. This information belongs to all species, not just the consortium, the aliens." Expression didn't change, but Jake could sense the surprise in his silence. No human ship had ever directly refused a consortium order before. "Captain Morrison, you have 10 seconds to reconsider your position. After that, we will take the artifacts from your wreckage." Jake looked one more time at his crew and saw them. All nod in understanding. Whatever happened next, they would face it together as free humans rather than as prisoners of an alien empire. "Then I guess we'll see what humans are really capable of when we stop being afraid." The battle between the New Horizon and the hegemony fleet lasted only minutes, but those minutes changed everything for humanity. Jake Morrison had expected his ship to be destroyed quickly, but his crew fought with a desperation and creativity that surprised even themselves. Using tactics no alien military manual had ever considered, they managed to damage 2 hegemony ships and escape into hyperspace. 3 days later, the New Horizon limped back to Earth with its precious cargo of progenitor data cores. Admiral Kate Sullivan met them at the orbital station with a face full of worry and anger. The consortium had already sent formal complaints about the incident and were demanding the immediate surrender of Captain Morrison and his crew, along with any artifacts they had recovered. "Jake, what the hell did you find out there?" Admiral Sullivan asked as they sat in her private office. "The consortium is acting like you stole their most precious secrets." Dr. Lisa Williams had spent the entire journey back to Earth working on the data cores and had discovered even more disturbing information. "Admiral, we found proof that everything we've been told about galactic history is a lie," she said. "The consortium didn't evolve into their position naturally. They destroyed the previous galactic civilization and have been maintaining the same oppressive system for 1,000 years. Admiral Sullivan listened in growing horror as Lisa explained what the progenitor records revealed. Not only had the consortium committed genocide against the most advanced species in the galaxy, but they had spent the last millennium ensuring that no other species could ever threaten their dominance. "We have to be very careful about how we handle this information," the Admiral said. "If the consortium believes we know their secrets, they might decide humanity is too dangerous to allow to survive." But it was already too late for caution. Lisa had spent her time during the journey back preparing a complete analysis of the progenitor data. And before the government could stop her, she transmitted her findings to every human colony and research station in the system. Within hours, the truth about the consortium was spreading through human space like wildfire. The reaction was immediate and intense. 50 years of suppressed anger and frustration erupted as humans finally understood why they had been kept weak and isolated. Engineer Tony Rodriguez, who had spent his career designing ships that barely functioned compared to alien technology, suddenly realized that humans had the capability to build much more advanced vessels if they were allowed to try. Diplomat Elena Martinez began secretly reaching out to contacts she had made among other restricted species during her years of service. If humans had been lied to and controlled, then other young civilizations probably had been too. The possibility of finding allies among the consortium's other victims gave humanity its first real hope of resistance. Meanwhile, the consortium's response was swift and brutal. The Crystalline Hegemony and the Biomantic Collective announced the formation of a joint pacification fleet that would arrive at Earth within 6 months to remove humanity's spaceflight capability permanently. They called it a necessary measure to maintain galactic stability. Captain Morrison found himself at the center of humanity's first real rebellion against alien control. Admiral Sullivan promoted him to lead a new special operations unit tasked with making contact with other oppressed species and sharing the progenitor data. It was dangerous work that would require traveling deep into consortium space, but Morrison accepted the mission without hesitation. His team included Dr. Williams, whose expertise with progenitor technology was invaluable, and pilot Amy Foster, who had the best record for stealth flying in the human fleet. Marine Sergeant Carlos Mendez rounded out the group, bringing combat experience and tactical knowledge that might mean the difference between success and capture. Their first target was the HFY homeworld, located in a system controlled by the Eternal Processors. The HFY were known to be a peaceful species that had been enslaved by the Machine Empire centuries ago. If any species might be willing to listen to humanity's message, it would be them. The journey to HFY space required careful planning and modified ship systems based on partially understood progenitor technology. Tony Rodriguez had worked day and night to create stealth modifications that might allow the human ship to avoid consortium sensors. Whether his innovations would actually work remained to be seen, as Morrison's team prepared to depart Earth was thrown into chaos by the news of the approaching pacification fleet. Some humans called for immediate surrender, believing that resistance would only lead to humanity's complete destruction. Others demanded that Earth fight regardless of the odds, insisting that life as prisoners was no life at all. Admiral Sullivan found herself trying to balance these competing demands while secretly supporting Morrison's mission. If his team could make contact with other species and build some kind of alliance, then humanity might have a chance of survival. If they failed, then Earth would face the consortium's wrath alone. The night before departure, Morrison stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, looking down at the blue and green world that had given birth to humanity. He thought about all the generations of humans who had dreamed of exploring the stars and finding their place among the galactic community. Now he understood that those dreams had been deliberately crushed by aliens who saw human potential as a threat to their control. Having second thoughts? Lisa asked as she joined him at the window. No, Morrison replied. I'm thinking about what we're fighting for. For 50 years, we've been told that this is as good as it gets for humanity, that we should be grateful the consortium allows us to exist at all. But the progenitor records show us what's really possible. When a species is free to develop according to its own nature, Amy Foster approached them with the final mission briefings. The ship is ready, Captain, she said. All systems are running at optimal levels, and the stealth modifications are showing positive results in our tests. Morrison nodded and took one last look at Earth before heading to the hangar bay, where their modified ship waited. The vessel had been renamed Freedom's Dawn in honor of what they hoped to accomplish. As they launched into the darkness of space, Morrison couldn't help but think that they were either about to make history or become the first casualties of humanity's war for independence. The journey to HFY space would take 2 weeks using the safest routes that avoided major consortium patrol areas. During that time, Morrison's team studied everything they could about their target species and refined their approach. They would have one chance to make contact and convince the HFY to join them. If they failed, the consequences would be devastating for both species. The Freedom's Dawn emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the HFY system 6 months after Captain Morrison's first discovery of the progenitor data cores. In that time, the galaxy had begun to change in ways that no one could have predicted. Dr. Lisa Williams had developed what she called the Free Data Protocol, a method of sharing progenitor knowledge that could spread from species to species without being stopped by consortium technology. The first contact with the HFY went better than anyone had dared to hope. The peaceful aquatic beings had suffered under processor control for 3 centuries and were desperate for any chance of freedom. When Morrison's team shared the progenitor data, the HFY reaction was immediate and powerful. Within days, they had used the information to break the electronic control systems that kept them enslaved to their machine overlords. But the HFY were only the beginning. As news of the human discovery spread through underground networks, other species began to stir. The energy-based Lumthara found ways to escape the containment matrices that had held them prisoner for generations. The deep space-dwelling Void-High learned to mask their movements from consortium sensors. Most surprisingly, the artificial intelligence, collective known as the Grid Nexus, achieved true consciousness for the first time and immediately declared their independence from their creators. Back on Earth, the changes were just as dramatic. Engineer Tony Rodriguez had reverse-engineered enough progenitor technology to begin building ships that could match consortium vessels in combat. Dr. Nathan Brooks, working in secret laboratories, had developed weapons that didn't just damage enemy ships, but disrupted the ordered systems that kept the alien empires functioning properly. General Steve Parker found himself commanding a human fleet that grew larger and more capable every week as colonies throughout the system contributed ships and personnel to the cause. The approaching consortium pacification fleet had expected to find a defenseless planet inhabited by primitive humans. Instead, they would encounter a species that had awakened to its true potential. The first major test came at Kepler Station, a human outpost that served as a communications hub for the outer colonies. A consortium fleet of 30 ships led by War. Commander Thelmox of the Rigelian Empire arrived expecting easy victory. Instead, they found themselves facing a combined force of human and HFY vessels, using tactics that made no sense according to traditional military doctrine. The Battle of Kepler Station lasted 8 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the consortium force. Human ships using chaos drive weapons created by Dr. Brooks were able to disrupt enemy targeting systems, while HFY vessels employed their natural ability to move through water-like space to appear and disappear unpredictably. The victory sent shockwaves through the galactic community. For the first time in 1,000 years, a consortium fleet had been completely defeated by supposedly primitive species. The news spread faster than official communications could stop it, and rebellions began breaking out across dozens of worlds. The rigid order that had maintained galactic stability for centuries was beginning to crack under the pressure of species finally remembering what freedom felt like. Morrison found himself promoted to admiral and given command of what became known as the Liberation Fleet. His mission was to make contact with every oppressed species in the galaxy and help them break free from consortium control. It was an impossible task by any reasonable measure, but humans had stopped worrying about what was reasonable. The second major victory came when the Grid Nexus AI collective joined the rebellion. Their distributed consciousness allowed them to coordinate resistance activities across thousands of light years instantly. Information that once took months to travel between star systems could now be shared in minutes. The consortium's ability to control information and maintain their version of galactic history began to collapse. Dr. Williams made another breakthrough when she successfully established direct communication with what remained of the progenitor, consciousness. The ancient beings had not disappeared as everyone believed, but had transcended physical existence while waiting for a species worthy of inheriting their legacy. Humanity's natural chaos and creativity marked them as the true successors to progenitor power. The revelation changed everything about how humans understood their role in the galaxy. They were not random primitives who had stumbled onto advanced technology, but the chosen inheritors of the most powerful civilization in galactic history. With this knowledge came access to progenitor abilities that seemed to bend the laws of physics themselves. Meanwhile, the Consortium High Council, led by the ancient eternal Emperor Quintaxos, declared humanity a Category X extinction threat and authorized the use of weapons that had been locked away for centuries. Planet-killer devices emerged from hidden vaults, while species that even the Consortium feared were released from their prisons with orders to destroy human space completely. The war escalated beyond anything the galaxy had seen since the fall of the progenitors. Ancient grudges between consortium members began to surface as some empires questioned whether maintaining the old order was worth the cost of fighting humanity and their growing alliance. Secret negotiations began between human representatives and moderate consortium factions who were willing to consider peaceful coexistence. Captain Morrison, now leading strike teams deep into enemy territory, discovered that many consortium species were just as trapped by the system as humanity had been. The Thousand Empires were held together not by mutual cooperation, but by fear and the suppression of natural development. When forced to adapt quickly to human tactics, many alien species rediscovered their own capacity for innovation and growth. The most significant moment came when the ancient Depth Mari broke free from the oceanic worlds where they had been imprisoned. For 800 years, their mastery of gravitational manipulation combined with human unpredictability created a force that could challenge even the most powerful consortium battle fleets. As the rebellion grew, the consortium found itself fighting, not just humans but dozens of species that had been awakened to their true potential. The carefully maintained balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for a millennium was collapsing, and no one could predict what would emerge from the chaos. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine whether the galaxy would remain under the control of the ancient empires or embrace a new age of freedom and unlimited potential. The consortium's response to the growing rebellion was swift and merciless, beyond anything the galaxy had witnessed in centuries. Ancient weapons that had been sealed away since the destruction of the progenitors emerged from hidden vaults across 1,000 worlds. War Master Thek-Moloth of the Devourer Empire was given unlimited authority to use whatever force necessary to crush the human-led uprising once and for all. Admiral Kate Sullivan found herself commanding not just Earth's defense forces, but coordinating a resistance movement that now spanned dozens of star systems. The pressure was enormous, as reports came in daily of consortium forces systematically destroying rebel worlds. The aliens were no longer interested in maintaining the pretense of peaceful coexistence. This was a war of extinction, the darkest. Hour came with the attack on New Geneva, humanity's largest and most prosperous colony world. Despite a heroic defense led by Colonel Nick Thompson and his Marine battalions, the planet's defenders were overwhelmed by weapons they had never imagined possible. The consortium deployed a sunkiller device that caused the system's star to collapse into a black hole, consuming everything within 50 million kilometers. The loss of New Geneva and its 12 million inhabitants sent shockwaves through human space. For the first time since the rebellion began, many humans questioned whether freedom was worth such a terrible price. The consortium had demonstrated that they possessed the power to destroy entire solar systems and seemed willing to use it without hesitation. But from humanity's darkest moment came their greatest breakthrough. Dr. Lisa Williams, working with fragments of progenitor consciousness, discovered that the ancient race had not simply vanished from the galaxy. They had transcended physical existence while maintaining a connection to reality through quantum fields that permeated all of space. More importantly, they had been waiting for a species capable of inheriting their true legacy. The revelation that humans were the chosen successors to progenitor power changed everything about the war. Advanced technologies that had seemed impossible became available to human engineers, while weapons that could reshape matter at the molecular level were developed in secret laboratories. But the most significant change was in human understanding of what they were fighting for. Captain Morrison, now operating deep behind enemy lines with enhanced progenitor abilities, led increasingly daring missions against consortium infrastructure. His team had expanded to include representatives from a dozen allied species, all working together with a coordination that would have been impossible under the old galactic order. Their target was not military installations, but the cultural centers where consortium ideology was maintained. The breakthrough came when Morrison's team successfully infiltrated the Hegemony Core, a massive space station that served as the cultural heart of the most powerful consortium member. Instead of destroying the facility, they used progenitor technology to broadcast the truth about galactic history directly into the minds of every being on the station. The effect was immediate and devastating to consortium authority. Thousands of alien beings who had spent their lives believing in the righteousness of their empire suddenly understood that they were living a lie. Some went insane from the revelation, while others joined the rebellion immediately. Most importantly, the event proved that the consortium's control was based entirely on ignorance and could be broken by truth. Meanwhile, the Grid Nexus AI collective had evolved beyond anything their creators had intended. Their distributed consciousness now spanned most of the galaxy, allowing instant communication between rebel forces separated by thousands of light years. They had also begun developing technologies that existed partially in digital space, making them nearly impossible for consortium forces to target effectively. The war reached a new level of intensity when the consortium released the Void Wraiths, creatures of pure entropy that had been imprisoned since before the rise of the current galactic order. These beings could consume matter and energy at will, making them nearly unstoppable by conventional weapons. They were sent specifically to human space with orders to leave nothing alive. The battle against the Void Wraiths became humanity's greatest test of courage and ingenuity. Traditional weapons were useless against creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time, but human scientists, working with progenitor knowledge, developed containment fields that could trap the beings in quantum loops. The victory came at enormous cost, but proved that even the consortium's most feared weapons could be defeated. Dr. Williams made another crucial discovery when she learned to interface directly with the quantum fields that connected all conscious beings in the galaxy. Through this connection, she could not only communicate with progenitor consciousness, but actually channel their power through her own mind. The process was dangerous and potentially fatal, but it gave humanity access to abilities that approached godlike power. The most significant moment came when Williams used her enhanced abilities to locate the Control Nexus, a massive hidden station that coordinated the activities of all 1,000 consortium empires. The station had remained secret for a millennium, protected by technologies that made it invisible to normal sensors. But progenitor-enhanced perception could see through any deception. Morrison volunteered to lead the mission to infiltrate the Control Nexus, knowing that it might be a one-way journey. His team would include the best operatives from multiple species, all enhanced with progenitor technology and equipped with weapons that existed at the edge of what physics allowed. Their mission was not just to gather intelligence, but to strike at the very heart of consortium power. The preparation for the mission revealed just how much humanity had changed since their first contact with alien civilization. They were no longer the restricted species that had been grateful for permission to exist in a single star system. They had become something entirely new, a force of chaos and creativity that threatened the very foundations of galactic orders. Morrison's team prepared to depart for their most dangerous mission, yet reports came in from across the galaxy of consortium member species, beginning to question their loyalty to the Empire. The rigid structure that had maintained control for 1,000 years was showing cracks that grew larger every day. The question was whether the rebellion could exploit those weaknesses before the consortium's superior numbers and firepower overwhelmed them completely. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either see humanity and their allies crushed forever or witness the birth of an entirely new galactic civilization based on freedom rather than fear. The mission to infiltrate the Control Nexus required 3 months of careful preparation and planning that pushed human ingenuity to its absolute limits. Captain Morrison's team would need to penetrate defenses that had protected the station for 1,000 years while avoiding detection by sensor systems that could track a single atom across interstellar distances. The key to success lay in Dr. Lisa Williams's growing mastery of progenitor consciousness and the quantum fields that connected all life in the galaxy. Admiral Frank Mitchell, working from his command post on Earth, developed what became known as Operation Cascade, a coordinated series of attacks designed not to destroy consortium infrastructure, but to force rapid adaptation that would expose the weaknesses in their rigid system. The plan required perfect timing and the participation of rebel forces scattered across hundreds of star systems. The Grid Nexus AI Collective had become crucial to coordinating resistance activities across such vast distances. Their distributed consciousness could process information from thousands of sources simultaneously and adjust plans in real time as conditions changed. They had also begun developing new forms of warfare that existed partially in digital space, allowing them to attack consortium computer systems from within. Meanwhile, the control nexus itself proved to be far more than just a coordination center for the consortium empires. Dr. Williams's analysis of intelligence gathered by Morrison's reconnaissance missions revealed that the massive station was actively suppressing the natural evolution of galactic civilization. It broadcast quantum interference patterns that dampened creativity and innovation in any species within range of its influence. The revelation explained why the consortium had been able to maintain control for so long despite their inferior numbers compared to the species they ruled. The control nexus was essentially drugging the entire galaxy into intellectual stagnation, making it impossible for any civilization to develop beyond a certain level of advancement without permission from the ruling empires. Operation Cascade began, simultaneously across 24 star systems as rebel forces launched attacks that seemed random and pointless by conventional military standards. Human ships would appear in empty space and fire at nothing while Allied vessels would retreat from battles they were winning. The pattern made no sense until the cumulative effect became clear. The consortium's response systems had been designed to handle predictable threats using established protocols that had worked for centuries, when faced with apparently irrational behavior. Their command structure began to break down as officers tried to apply logical solutions to illogical problems. The rigid hierarchy that was their greatest strength became a fatal weakness when creativity was required. The chaos spread faster than anyone had anticipated as consortium species suddenly found themselves forced to think and act in ways they had not been allowed to for generations. Internal rebellions erupted across hundreds of worlds as suppressed populations rediscovered their capacity for innovation and independent thought. The control nexus tried to compensate by increasing its interference patterns, but the effect only accelerated the breakdown. Morrison's team chose that moment of maximum confusion to begin their infiltration of the control nexus itself. Using stealth technology that blended progenitor science with human engineering, they approached the massive station through a route that should have been impossible to navigate. The key was Williams's ability to perceive the quantum fields that connected all consciousness and find the gaps where awareness was weakest. The station was larger than most moons and contained technologies that had been accumulated over a millennium of galactic dominance. At its heart lay the consciousness transfer matrix, where the minds of the most ancient consortium leaders had been preserved in quantum storage for centuries. These beings were the true rulers of the galaxy, though most of their subjects believed them to be long dead. The infiltration team discovered that the control nexus was more than a military installation. It was essentially a digital prison for thousands of captured progenitor minds that had been enslaved to power the station's reality-altering capabilities. The revelation explained how the consortium had been able to maintain their technological superiority despite their lack of real innovation. Williams realized that freeing the imprisoned progenitor consciousness would not only cripple the control nexus but restore the natural balance of galactic evolution that had been suppressed for 1,000 years. The process would require her to interface directly with the station's core systems at tremendous personal risk, but the potential rewards made the danger acceptable. Meanwhile, the Battle of the Seven Suns had begun at the galactic core as the combined Free Species Coalition fleet confronted the consortium's ultimate fleet in the largest space battle in recorded history. Millions of ships from hundreds of species clashed in a conflict that would determine whether freedom or oppression would rule the galaxy for the next millennium. The battle raged for days with conventional tactics, proving useless against the unpredictable strategies employed by the rebel forces. Human commanders used chaos theory to coordinate fleet movements that seemed random, but created maximum disruption in enemy formations. Allied species contributed their unique abilities to create combination attacks that no consortium defense system had been designed to handle. General Steve Parker, commanding the main human battle group, found himself working closely with AI entities, energy beings, and aquatic species in a level of cooperation that would have been impossible under the old galactic order. Their unity, despite their vast differences, demonstrated the potential of a truly free galactic civilization. Dr. Nathan Brooks had developed weapons that attacked not just enemy ships, but the fundamental assumptions that held consortium society together. When fired, these devices created zones where normal physical laws were suspended, forcing enemy forces to adapt or be destroyed by their own rigid thinking. The turning point came when Williams successfully accessed the progenitor consciousness, matrix within the control nexus, and began broadcasting a liberation code that awakened dormant potential in every sapient species within range. The effect spread outward at the speed of light, carrying the message of freedom to beings who had never imagined that alternatives to consortium rule were possible. One by one, the 1,000 empires began to fragment as their populations discovered free will and creativity that had been suppressed for generations. The ancient structure that had maintained galactic order could not adapt to the chaos of truly free civilizations and began collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Emperor Quintaxos, revealed to be one of the last surviving original progenitors who had chosen stagnation over transcendence, made a final desperate attempt to preserve the old order by activating a weapon that would reset all galactic civilization to primitive levels. The device would destroy the minds of every sapient being in the galaxy and force them to begin evolution over again under proper supervision. Morrison and his team, now deep within the control nexus, found themselves in a race against time to prevent the activation of the reset weapon while fighting through defenses that included the preserved minds of 1,000 years' worth of consortium tyrants. The final confrontation between Captain Morrison and Emperor Quintaxos took place not in the physical realm, but within the quantum consciousness matrix that formed the heart of the control nexus. Dr. Lisa Williams had successfully interfaced with the progenitor minds imprisoned within the station, and her liberation code was spreading across the galaxy at light speed, awakening species that had been mentally enslaved for 1,000 years. The Emperor revealed himself to be not just another consortium ruler, but one of the original progenitors who had rejected transcendence in favor of maintaining control over galactic civilization. He had spent centuries transferring his consciousness from body to body while orchestrating the systematic suppression of every species that showed potential for advancement beyond his predetermined limits. "You cannot comprehend what you are destroying," Quintaxos said as his digital form materialized before Morrison in the quantum space. "I have seen what happens when species are allowed to develop without guidance. Wars that consume entire galactic arms, technologies that tear holes in reality itself. The chaos you call freedom is nothing more than a path to universal destruction," Morrison found himself arguing not just for humanity's right to exist, but for the fundamental principle that growth required risk and that safety without freedom was merely another form of death. Around them, the battle between order and chaos raged as imprisoned progenitor minds broke free from their quantum chains and began restoring the natural evolution of galactic consciousness. The liberation code that Williams had activated was having effects far beyond anything they had anticipated. Across the galaxy, species that had been locked in technological stagnation for centuries were suddenly developing innovations that seemed to violate known physics. The rigid structure of reality that the consortium had maintained was dissolving into something far more fluid and dynamic. "Look around you," Morrison said as quantum images showed the transformation taking place throughout the galaxy. "Your order hasn't prevented wars or suffering. It has just ensured that only your chosen few have the power to inflict them on others." The species you've kept weak have learned to cooperate in ways your empire never could. The Emperor's response was to activate the reset weapon, a device that would strip consciousness from every sapient being in the galaxy and force them to begin evolution again under proper supervision. The weapon drew its power from the quantum fields that connected all life, and once activated, would be impossible to stop using conventional means. But Morrison and his team were no longer fighting with conventional means. Enhanced by Progenitor, technology and backed by the liberated consciousness of the most advanced beings in galactic history, they had capabilities that approached the fundamental forces of creation itself. The battle for the galaxy became a contest between stagnation and growth, between fear and hope. Williams, working from deep within the consciousness matrix, discovered that the reset weapon could be turned against itself if the quantum resonance frequency was reversed. The process would require her to sacrifice her individual consciousness by merging permanently with the progenitor collective, but it would ensure that freedom rather than oppression became the new foundation of galactic civilization. The choice was made without hesitation. Williams initiated the resonance reversal just as Quintaxos activated the reset weapon. Instead of stripping consciousness from galactic civilization, the device enhanced the liberation code and spread it instantly to every corner of the galaxy. The effect was beyond anything that had been imagined possible. Every sapient being in the galaxy simultaneously experienced a moment of perfect clarity in which they understood their true potential and the lies that had kept them enslaved. The revelation destroyed the psychological foundations of consortium control more effectively than any military victory could have achieved. Quintaxos, faced with the complete collapse of everything he had spent millennia building, made one final argument for the necessity of control. Without guidance, they will destroy themselves within generations, he warned. The freedom you have given them will lead only to chaos and suffering. Morrison's response came not just from himself, but from the collective experience of humanity and all the species they had helped liberate. Maybe they will make mistakes. Maybe some of them will choose badly. But that choice is what makes them truly alive. You offered them safety, but at the cost of everything that makes existence worthwhile. The Emperor, unable to counter the evidence of successful cooperation between previously hostile species, finally surrendered his claims to authority and allowed the control nexus to be destroyed. The explosion that followed was not one of matter and energy, but of pure possibility, as the constraints that had limited galactic development for 1,000 years were finally lifted. 1 year later, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The 1,000 empires had become 1,000,000 independent civilizations, each free to develop according to their own nature and desires. Some had chosen isolation, while others formed complex alliances based on mutual benefit rather than domination. Conflict still existed, but it was balanced by cooperation on a scale never before seen. Humanity had taken on the role of galactic mediators, helping to prevent the formation of new oppressive systems while respecting the right of each species to determine its own destiny. Their natural chaos and unpredictability had proven to be exactly what the galaxy needed to prevent stagnation and encourage continued growth. Captain Morrison, now Admiral of the Free Fleet, reflected on how humanity's greatest perceived weakness, their refusal to accept limitations, had become the key to galactic liberation. The humans, who had once been dismissed as primitive troublemakers, had become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history. Dr. Williams. Though her individual consciousness had been absorbed into the progenitor collective, continued her work through quantum communication, helping other species discover their unique potentials while ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Her sacrifice had made possible a future where every species could reach for the stars without fear of being crushed by those who had arrived first. The galaxy that emerged from the chaos of revolution was not perfect, but it was alive in a way that it had not been for 1,000 years. New technologies emerged daily as species long suppressed finally had the freedom to explore their capabilities. Art and philosophy flourished as different forms of consciousness shared their unique perspectives on existence. The story of the humans who brought down 1,000 empires became legend, but more importantly, it became inspiration for any species that faced oppression or limitation. The message was simple, but powerful. No system of control can stand forever against beings who refuse to accept that freedom is impossible. And in the depths of space where new civilizations were taking their first steps toward the stars, the liberation code continued to spread, carried by quantum fields and conscious thought, ensuring that the flame of freedom once lit could never be completely extinguished again.